This is episode 597 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing, president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. I am very pleased to be joined this week by Nella Domenici. She is a Republican running for the U.S. Senate seat here in New Mexico this fall. Welcome to Tipping Point, New Mexico, Nella.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, it is great to have you and talk a little bit about your run for the U.S. Senate and issues relating to Congress and Washington, D.C. But before we get too deep into the issues, of course, your name is quite a well-known name in political circles, especially, but really throughout New Mexico. And just share a little bit about yourself with us, being PeteDomenici's daughter. Kind of talk about who you are and how you decided to run for the U.S. Senate.
Um, well, that's a great question. Actually, my phone is ringing, Denise. Can you grab my bag and just take it far away? Sorry. Um, so being the daughter of Senator Domenici has been a wonderful privilege and great for my learning and my values. He's an incredible role model. But there's sort of three things I'd like to talk about when people are curious about what it's like to have been his daughter. So first of all, there's 8 kids in my family. We had a very big family. And my father was such a hard-working senator. He was just constantly spending long days in Washington. They'd vote, at midnight, and then flying back and forth to New Mexico. So I think most of the kids, part of the time, we thought we really loaned our father to the state, and we were proud that we shared him with the state, and we knew he was making a huge difference for many people in the state. And then, interestingly enough, when I did get to spend time with my father, because it wouldn't be like an everyday dinner kind of thing, I got to spend time with him, for example, when I traveled the state in the summers helping him campaign. And so because New Mexico is so vast, we would take really long car rides all over the state getting to the different spots we were headed to. And he would just share with me his views of problems, how problems could be solved. He'd explain to me the economics of the areas we were going to and the geopolitical issues. And he had such pride in many of the projects that he worked on. So, for example, when he would take me to the southeast corner, he would talk about WIP and Urenco and explain how those things were developed and how he pushed them through. And when we were up north and going to Los Alamos, he would talk about some of the most creative things he did there. So I just want to share one with you because he was such a problem solver and such an innovator and an independent thinker, and he loved to get things done. And so he was there. He was explaining to me that he was there visiting with the head of Los Alamos Labs and some of the other scientists, and they were thinking, maybe we could map the human genome. Maybe that's possible. And they were talking to him about it, and they said, if only we had $70 million, we'd be able to do it. And he was deeply concerned about healthcare and science, and he loved mixing those two topics. He listened to them. It was an hour discussion or so, and he said, I'm going to get back to you. And literally 6 weeks later, he called them and said, I have your money. We have the money. Get started. And that was the beginning of the human genome mapping, which really changed healthcare and changed the way we could treat our Americans in so many different ways. So I learned a great deal from him, but mostly he was a role model for me in terms of how to take risks, solve problems, listen to people, innovate, and be truly an independent thinker who collaborated all the time to get things done. But I also learned from him how to run campaigns.
Okay.
And that's sort of the opposite. Campaigns are a lot about just inspiring thousands and thousands of people and setting up phone banks and setting up, walkathons where you're going door to door and putting signs in yards, etc. And so I learned about campaigns from him for many years. And I started learning when I was 10. So he ran for governor when I was 10 and he lost, which was traumatic for all of us. So I learned about the volatility of campaigns. But when I was 12, he ran for Senate. And I didn't want him to lose. So I thought, what can I do to help him? And he ran his campaign with this slogan called People for Pete. It was everywhere, People for Pete. Probably some of you on this call remember those blue buttons. So I was 12. I started something called Little People for Pete. And we had about 50 kids. We were just 10, 11, 12, 13. And what we did, because we wanted to give money to that campaign, is we collected aluminum cans. Every Saturday, we'd go down alleys and collect these filthy aluminum cans, schlep them over to the grocery store, and get our money and give it directly to the campaign. And luckily for us, the Albuquerque Journal heard about it, and the Albuquerque Journal asked if I would sit on top a huge pile of aluminum cans. And of course, I did. And that ended up on the cover of the Albuquerque Journal. So from that one little incident, I learned a lot about the importance of raising money and the importance of press, and especially free press.
All right. Well, so describe some of your professional experiences and why this is the time that you wanted to run for the U.S. Senate.
So, hearkening back again, I had just lots of role models in my family about the importance of giving back to society and the importance of just old-fashioned service. And so ever since I really went to law school, I had been thinking and hoping that I would be able to give back to New Mexico. And it's not easy to just decide to run for Senate or run for governor. A lot of stars need to be aligned. So I had been, over the last 5 years, I had been thinking about running for office in New Mexico. But it's not easy, as a Republican to run for office. The Democrats have a very big foothold here. So I needed to think carefully and analyze the situation and make sure that the door was wedged open for me to run. And right now, I decided to run this time because things are just so bad in New Mexico. It's really a crescendo of problems which our leaders are responsible for. And because of this crescendo of problems, which I'm happy to talk about, unfortunately, I definitely think New Mexicans are looking for new leadership. They're looking for a change in philosophy, a change in approach. And they are looking for someone who's more of a moderate collaborator, who's not an extremist. But you want me to talk a little bit about the crescendo of problems from my perception?
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
So I think that COVID was the beginning of this crescendo. And during COVID, our leaders in this state did the wrong thing. They held our kids out of school for way too long, much more than other states. They closed our businesses, our small businesses, our hotels, our restaurants for way too long, and they put many companies out of business. And because of the decisions of COVID, which were so extreme and so damaging, a lot of New Mexicans really began to say, this isn't right, this isn't acceptable, this is not the state I want, this is not the leadership I want. But then right on top of COVID, we had a couple other very bad phenomena. We have this high cost of living, driven by inflation. And for New Mexicans, high cost of living increases really touch New Mexicans. When eggs and milk double in price, when gasoline goes up 30%. People feel these every day and every week. And then on top of the high cost of living, we have the border issue. And we have a huge crime issue. And the two are probably somewhat related. But I'm sure you just saw last week in Forbes that New Mexico has the terrible distinction of being the number one state for the worst crime. And so I think that New Mexicans have just felt one problem piling up on top of another one, and they want change, they want improvement. And if they don't get it, frankly, New Mexicans are starting to wonder, is this the right state to be in? Because things are just so bad here.
Now, obviously, the Rio Grande Foundation works with the legislature. Certain governors, maybe not so much this one, but you are running against Martin Heinrich, who is a sitting U.S. senator. He's, of course, got a long track record in New Mexico politics, back to city council here in Albuquerque. Somebody who, in my opinion, takes a very left wing approach to every issue, but really seems to mostly care about his so called environmental issues that he has his pet issues. Talk about your specific policy disagreements with Senator Heinrich.
So we disagree on many, many issues. And I do want to highlight that his pet issue, sort of the green and clean issue, is no longer a priority concern for New Mexicans
Mm-hmm.
because New Mexicans are just trying to get food on the table and get gas in their car and get to their job. But we disagree in many areas, and this is really why I think he's not right for New Mexico. And let's, of course, start with energy. He really wants to destroy the oil and gas industry. The oil and gas industry, New Mexico will, should, and can be a state that's strong in all types of energy. We're blessed with, a great environment for wind, a great environment for solar, etc. But what we are right now, we're heavily oil and gas, and oil and gas industry literally provides the money for our students' education. It provides some of the absolute best jobs in this state. And the oil and gas industry here in New Mexico, coupled with the rest of America, can also help keep inflation lower, as it can help keep the cost of energy lower. It can create a sense of energy reliability so we don't have to worry about blackouts and other really horrific problems that can occur. And the oil and gas industry in America, if used properly, can lead to America being an energy independent country, which is really part of our defense strategy. So oil and gas is so important to New Mexico. It's so important to our country. And Martin Heinrich, for some reason, he sincerely wants to destroy and cripple the industry, which makes no sense for the average New Mexican.
Well, a couple of issues that are kind of top of mind, specifically relating to Heinrich on energy, gas stoves and prospectively banning those. Now, I'll tell you a quick story. I wrote a column in National Review that I had relied on Heinrich's Twitter feed for this issue, because it would never even occurred to me that somebody was going after gas stoves. That was a good year before the Biden administration kind of floated that trial balloon on gas stoves. And then when that happened, National Review ran my piece again and said, oh, look, Paul Gessing was ahead of the curve on this one. And it was just because I was watching kind of I think Heinrich is at the vanguard. He's among the most radical. He cares more deeply about these, control issues for how people live their lives and rationing energy than anybody else in Washington, D.C. So on one hand, gas stoves, and the other hand, electric vehicles, which of course the governor is very much supportive of, but Heinrich is as well. You mentioned putting gas in your car. Well, Heinrich is not about gas in the car. He's about, plugging your car in and et cetera, et cetera. So either of those two issues or anything else relating to energy and Heinrich's record?
Well, your comments bring up another but highly related sort of philosophical point. He's very much about mandating how people should live, mandating what cars they should drive, what stoves they should cook on, but also how they should heat and air condition their homes. But nevertheless, I think he is one of the most extremists in the United States Senate. And again, New Mexico gets hurt more by these policies than most states. And let's look and double click for a minute on the clean car policies that are going on in this state. So first of all, car dealers are very important in New Mexico. They employ many, many people here. They're a big part of the fabric of our communities. He's basically pushing legislation which will force our car dealers to have 40% of their inventory be electric vehicles in a couple years. Just let's make sure we understand that. Right now, New Mexican car dealers are selling 4% of their cars are clean cars, and he wants them to bring in 40%. That will damage the car dealers. It will damage their ability to employ people. Some car dealers might go under. But yet, because of his obsession with clean and green, he is mandating these companies to behave in a way which will really, really hurt them. And it's unacceptable in a capitalist community to have the government making such an oppressive mandate on an industry that is so important to every single city in this state.
Yeah. People in New Mexico obviously have been focused on, to the extent that they have, on the EV issue on the governor, but the Biden administration did just roll out a new regulatory framework as well. And my view is that unless you, as a U.S. senator, uh, publicly oppose these kinds of things, you should be given full credit for them because you're allowing them to happen on your watch. And when the president's of your party and you're essentially encouraging this behavior, it's on you to act as a U.S. senator. Go
There's
ahead.
another part of his it relates to energy, but
Hmm.
also ranching.
Hmm.
There's something I've created a verb. It's called, creating these monuments, and I call it the monumentization of New Mexico.
Sure.
So, with an executive order, Biden, I'm sure with the support of Heinrich, is able to take vast, vast parts of our natural domain and turn it into what's called wilderness. And in doing so, blocking that part of the terrain from being used for grazing, for cattle ranching, for mining, and for drilling. And so there is this real land grab going on in New Mexico right now by the radical progressives in Washington. And it's damaging not only to oil and gas, it's damaging to different mining companies, and it's damaging to, families that have been ranchers for decades and decades, because they don't know if one day, out of the blue, they're going to lose huge rights to graze their cattle as they've done for decades and decades.
Yeah, the latest is the Mimbres Peaks National Monument proposal. And of course, as you say, because of the way the antiquities laws work in the United States, Biden can do that by himself. Of course, Heinrich is right there at his side, encouraging that kind of behavior. But let's talk about another lands issue. And you were just at the burn scar of the Calf Canyon and Hermit's Peak fire, which, of course, I'm looking at a KOB.com story about the fact that it's 2 years since those fires got going. It was a really unusual fire year 2 years ago when that happened. And of course, those fires were started by federal officials, Forest Service staff, and theoretically, the federal government should be doing everything in its power to assist landowners and people affected by that. But you don't hear a lot from Heinrich about those issues for a variety of reasons, I'm sure. But you were there. Talk about your experience there and that issue, involving federal land management.
So it's been very. I spent really like half a day or more than almost a full day there this Saturday, and I had done a lot of research on the situation before going there. But going there, when I was there, I met with many of the victims, and I literally heard probably 40 victims' stories. And even driving up here this morning, I was reading a 3-page letter from one of the victims describing the situation. And there's like 3 or 4 levels of very unacceptable things that happened. So even first of all, the way the fire was started, the timing of the fire, the response to the fire, that is all confounding, and I mean suspicious. And it was very just hugely damaging. But then even after the fire, the flood damage, because so much of the terrain was just destroyed, that the flood damage became a whole nother horrific problem. And how that's been handled is also confounding. And then there's the more obvious, just flat out unacceptable problem, which is FEMA. And FEMA has a huge amount of money has been allocated to be given to the victims to reimburse them for their
$4
damages.
billion in federal funds.
$4 billion, and only about 400 million of that has gone out to victims so far. Victims have filed about $600 million worth of claims, and many, many more dollars than that have gone out as fees to FEMA and other organizations involved in distributing these funds. But the simple point is, if FEMA is failing, then the leadership of our state is responsible. So when you're the leader of an organization, if you're the CEO of a company, if you're the governor, if you're the United States senator, when you're the leader and there's vendors there that are supposed to serve your constituents in a certain way, your job is to get the right vendor. And if FEMA is doing everything wrong or everything way too slowly, your job is either to fix FEMA or replace FEMA. And there are organizations that do this. They specialize in dealing with these kind of major fire burns and the insurance process around them. So there's many things that Michelle Grisham and Martin Heinrich could have done in the last 2 years to reduce the amount of time that our New Mexicans have spent, 2 years and more, waiting for their funds so that they can rebuild their lives. And I juxtapose this to my father when there was a fire around 2000, the Serra Grande fire in Los Alamos. And he had his staff work with FEMA every single day, going through every single victim's filing of a complaint, deciding yes or no, and usually deciding yes, pay them. And he met with them once a month. So his approach to dealing with FEMA is, we're going to be hands-on, we're going to be all over them, they're going to do it right, our citizens are going to be treated right. But instead, our leaders, like Martin Heinrich, have chosen to just point their fingers at FEMA, but that doesn't help. That doesn't help the person who's now 2 years into this and they still haven't received a nickel to rebuild their home that was destroyed 2 years ago.
Yeah, and I was looking at that KOB story and saw Representative Leger Fernandez quoted about the situation with FEMA. Did not see anything relating to Senator Heinrich. And again, as an enthusiastic follower of Heinrich's Twitter feed, I do not see much information from the senator about things he's doing to help make those people whole. Would you say that that's just why is that? Explain that to me to the best of your ability.
What I want to do is juxtapose that to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been running for office for 11 weeks or something like that. And as soon as I was declared the nominee, so basically won the primary, which was about 5 or 6 weeks ago, I said, we are going to focus on the fire and the victims. And we have already prepared a piece of legislation which would help get the victims money sooner. So I had me and my team, and I have an excellent team, partially because I was lucky enough to have some of my father's former staffers who are brilliant at policy work on my team. So we have come up with the policy idea that the state of New Mexico, which has lots of excess capital right now in various different pockets, that the state of New Mexico actually make a kind of zero interest loan to FEMA, to the fire victims, based on what they think they should be reimbursed. And basically we make this loan for 80% of what they should and will be reimbursed. And then they get the cash and they can go move forward with their life. And the state of New Mexico then takes on the risk of dealing with FEMA. And the state of New Mexico fights with FEMA. And if the state of New Mexico gets more than the 80% that we gave to the victim, we give that all to the victim. So the state of New Mexico wouldn't be making any money off this, but they would be using the abundance of capital, which we do have in this state right now, to make a very, very good and important investment in these victims of the fire who have been suffering so much. So my simple point is, our state can get money to these victims, and then our state can duke it out with FEMA to get the actual money from FEMA. And it's a very creative solution to solve the real problem that these victims have, which is they need to be reimbursed for their losses so they can move forward in their lives.
Sounds like a winning platform for some state legislative candidates, especially in northern New Mexico as well. So
We
kudos for that.
we it will be a bipartisan effort, and we have reached out to some of those people.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so that was going to get to my next question, but I'll ask it this way. You've been very involved and active in the education reform sphere here in New Mexico. And that issue, of course, looms large. It's predominantly, unlike uh, on the other side, philosophically, you get some Democrat legislators who will, or Democrat city council candidates for even, who will say, I'm pro abortion, that kind of thing. I believe in asking questions related to you as a U.S. Senate candidate, not how you're going to reform education in New Mexico. But that is clearly a passion of yours. Do you have thoughts on improving education in New Mexico, and specifically how you help manage the federal funds that are available for education in ways that bring better results to our state? Because ultimately that system needs to be addressed. We're dead last in education, 52nd according to the National Assessment of Educational Progress.
So my husband and I, about 7 or 8 years ago, we, with a wonderful group of bipartisan leaders in the state of New Mexico, with that group, we started an organization called Excellent Schools for New Mexico. And what it is, it's a nonprofit that supports charter schools in the poorest, most underserved parts of our state. And what Excellent Schools of New Mexico does, it will identify top performing charter schools in underserved areas, and then it will give them grants to help grow. So sometimes they need to add new grades, sometimes they need to double in size, sometimes they need to build a new gym. So we help those very, very good charter schools grow. But we also help, which is super exciting, we help fund young people who want to start a charter school. So we will find some of the most compelling young people who want to start a charter school. We fund them for over a year to go design their school. They get all sorts of support and expertise. And then they put that up for approval, and our students have all been approved. Our schools, I'm sorry, have all been approved. And then we actually help them start a school in a very underserved part of New Mexico. So currently there are nearly 9,000 students getting in the schools that Excellent Schools of New Mexico is supporting and reaching out to. And the Excellent Schools of New Mexico charter schools are outperforming their peer non-charter schools. Now it's important to remember charter schools are public schools. They're just a different mechanism, they're a different design, a different modus operandi for running the school. But we've proven that this model can actually work here. But more than that, we've proven that our parents and our students deserve to have options, that we need competition in our school system, we need options, and we need transparency. We need to be able to compare and contrast, and parents need the freedom to send their children to school that will really, really work for them.
Any ideas about how you can leverage the federal government and the money it does spend on education to improve that in New Mexico and across the country? Because obviously, and I appreciate definitely your work as a private citizen on improving education in New Mexico. We need a lot more people like yourself engaged in that. But looking at policy problem from Washington, D.C., it's obviously a challenge.
So there are federal grants for charter schools. So
Mm.
New Mexico was just a large recipient of one that we helped apply for, and then we did get. So I
Okay.
think we can in Washington try to make sure that any funding that is going to elementary, middle, and high schools from the federal government is considering and making sure that charter schools are one of the possibilities.
Okay, great. And last few questions, but I'm also happy to answer or talk about anything else you would like to talk about. When you're a U.S. senator, you're one of 100 people
You know what? Can I
Okay,
interrupt for a minute?
sure.
Because I think, that one of the things you like to do in your questions is you like me to compare and contrast myself to Martin
Hmm.
Heinrich. And I think that's important for New Mexicans to really be able to compare and
Sure.
contrast. That's the beauty of our country, right? Well, I think Martin Heinrich is completely against charter schools. He's afraid of charter schools because they can do so well and they are a threat to the status quo, and the status quo is really terrible here. So I think as you're considering different leaders, having a leader who's willing to take a risk and change our education system should be a very, very important criteria. And when we started Excellent Schools of New Mexico, everyone told us it can never be done. Charter schools can't thrive here. They can't get support. They can't get momentum. And so we started it when everyone was negative, and we found 10 or so other board members who wanted to take a risk and really make things better for our students who deserve it. And that should be compared to Martin Heinrich.
Yeah, well, there's no doubt that Heinrich not only doesn't seem to be interested particularly in the education issue, but I think it's twofold. It's both lack of interest because his priorities are elsewhere, but also he doesn't want to embarrass the mismanagement over a very long time of his own political party and people like Michelle Lujan Grisham. But I've got to get a couple more questions, and
Sure,
of
sorry.
course, that's okay. Uh, you're one of 100 potentially in Washington. You're going to have a president, potentially Donald J. Trump, who is a lightning rod in a way that few politicians in the history of our nation have been lightning rods, and the abortion issue as well. And I'm going to combine that kind of into the following. You know, Trump recently talked about how abortion should ultimately be, as Roe v. Wade was decided, a state level political issue. Uh, how do you feel about the abortion issue, broadly speaking, and anything about President Trump and how you might see yourself working with him or at odds with him on some issue or another?
So I do see those two questions as interrelated, so I'll try to answer them both. First of all, with regards to how will I work with Donald Trump? So I'm a very independent thinker. I've been a very independent thinker my entire life. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I've had a great role model for independent thinkers. So when it comes to deciding on a whole range of important policies and important issues that relate to New Mexico, I will analyze each one individually and think about them independently. And sometimes I will agree with our president, whoever that may be, and sometimes I will disagree. So sometimes I might agree with Donald Trump, and other times I might well disagree. I'm not looking for an endorsement from Donald Trump. I'm not I won't be giving an endorsement to Donald Trump. I'm really just looking for endorsements from all of the voters of New Mexico. And let me just parlay that
Sure.
into your abortion question. And just if you could keep in mind this notion of being an independent thinker. So I think that abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. And most importantly, they should be rare. I really want to reduce abortions. I'm opposed to a federal ban on abortion, and New Mexico has decided on its abortion policy, and I will abide by that. Given my deep passion and commitment to reducing abortions, and I have spent a lot of time studying this topic, and I've been focused on women's health for many, many years, I am going to focus on reducing unintended pregnancies. That's the best way to reduce abortions. And that's actually what our country should be focused on. And when you focus on unintended pregnancies at a national level, 1 out of every 3 results in an abortion. So I want to have a major effort that says, how can we make sure the best birth control is available to our women? I want us to be able to educate our women on birth control choices, make those birth control choices available to them, trust and respect their decision making as it relates to increased use of birth control to reduce unintended pregnancies. I don't want to participate in big debates about which week. I want to have efforts that reduce unintended pregnancies so we don't even have to talk about any weeks. That will be my focus.
All
I
right.
think it's very, very important that all babies are wanted and loved, women are respected and trusted, and that men are responsible for their parenting.
Very well said. So we are about at the point where we could wrap up, but I do want to give you an opportunity to share any uh, concluding remarks or anything that you feel like we've not discussed. Obviously, there are a million and one different issues in Washington, D.C. to be discussed, and maybe we'll be able to have another conversation. You are running unopposed in the Republican primary, so this is, I guess, your pre-primary conversation, and then maybe after the primary we can have you back. But anything else you want to get out there for our listeners and viewers?
Well, I just really want to thank you for having me, and thank you for providing your audience with this set of like comparative analytics. And I look forward to coming back. There's many, many other areas that we can compare and contrast myself to Martin Heinrich on. I do think that we need to understand crime better and how to resolve the crime issue in this state. And until the crime issue is really cracked, that's going to be a major impediment for job growth, for people moving here, for companies locating here. And so I think I'd really welcome coming back and focusing on some of the differences between me and Martin Heinrich on how we're dealing with border issues, how we're dealing with cartel issues, how we would put pressure on the federal government to send more resources to our state, both in our cities that have horrible homicides and horrible cartels like Albuquerque, and at the border.
And I would add to that issues like healthcare and Obamacare, the failure of New Mexico to attract and keep doctors, which is both a state and a federal issue. Of course, the debt deficits, free trade. We've got plenty to talk about. So,
a lot.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much
for your time
it's great
today,
being here.
Nella. And thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointsnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.